Hello and welcome. You're listening to the Open Door Philanthropy Conference Special. We brought our microphones down to the Nexus U.S. Summit this year at the United States Institute of Peace. And in plain view of the Lincoln Memorial, over the course of 2 days, we conducted 10 interviews with a diverse array of conference delegates. Some of our guests, like Hank Love from the American Jobs Project, were actively fundraising. And I was able to convince Hank to submit a proposal to the unfunded list that's currently under review. Other guests, like Karen Yanis, were active funders. Karen ran Oprah Winfrey's foundation for 10 years. I was able to convince Karen to join the evaluation committee. We had a bunch of other cool folks sit down with us who were a little bit harder to find. On a personal note, this was just an absolute blast for me. I got the chance to interview some of my favorite people in a beautiful setting. We had amazing conversations. I hope you'll listen and understand that these represent just a microcosm of my own participation in Nexus over the years. I've been attending this conference for almost 9 years now. Each conversation you listen to here, whether I've just met our guest or known them for years, is reminiscent of hundreds of conversations I've had in the halls of Nexus over the years. People ask me often how I've built such an impressive network. And I can tell you that it's because of conversations like these. At the very least, I think you'll find them entertaining. Please note that these were recorded live on site in a less than ideal acoustic circumstance. You can pretty much always hear me because I'm basically Shrek. But sometimes our guests are a little bit harder to hear. We'll do our best to make transcripts available since every word of these conversations were important and interesting. But for now, I hope you enjoy. Hello, this is day 2 at the Nexus U.S. Summit. I'm at the U.S. Institute of Peace in Washington, D.C. With one of my favorite philanthropists, Candice Cook. Welcome, Candice.
Thank you so much, Dave. It's an honor to be here with you.
I assure you the honor is mine. Why don't you tell the folks a little bit about yourself? Where are you from, Candice?
I am originally from Atlanta, Georgia.
I've never heard of it. Where is that? It's east of here?
Southeast, yes. Well, south of D.C. for sure, absolutely. And I have lived up and down the East Coast. So home has always been the state of Georgia. But I've had additional homes on top of that home foundation. So I lived in Virginia, Tennessee, Texas, California for a brief stint, and New York. And New York is now where I am making my family's home. And between there and Atlanta, those are our 2 home bases, if one can have such a thing.
Perhaps. Tell me about your family.
So I come from a family, interestingly enough, my mom was from D.C., or is from D.C. She grew up in D.C. She went to boarding school, but she's from D.C. And my dad grew up in a very small town in Georgia called Coweta County, and it's in Noonan. And so Noonan is actually the exact location. But they've always been very passionate about, my mom more so in terms of activities, but my dad in terms of behind the scenes action. And so together they infused in our family a sense of ownership over your place in society, whether that's financial contribution or time, in most cases both. And that it's not a luxury to be able to do that, it's a necessity. And it's something that you are not necessarily called to do, it's something you're drafted for. And so that's been a responsibility of mine since I was a child. And when I would say, Mommy, I don't have any money to give to this particular cause, then she would say, all right, well then we need to find another way to do it. And if that meant dropping me off miles, and I'm not exaggerating, but it's not miles as in 10 miles. Miles as in maybe 2. And then rolling the car slowly down the street so that I would get up and pick up trash, because she would say, someone dropped trash. We can't have trash in the neighborhood. And I kept thinking, okay, well, they should be the ones to come and pick it up. And my mom's position was, someone has to pick it up. And you're here. You can do it. This is your role. Take ownership of this space. And my dad did not make me pick up trash down the street, but my mom did. She would make me do petitions.
The state of Maine made me do that once.
Oh gosh. Yes, I was not. Mine was under a different guise. But yeah, and so because of that, it spoke to me. And granted, I think from a visceral level as a child, there are things that can be very attractive about philanthropy from the activity side, right? Not necessarily the doing the work part, but there was this social component. And so in my household, what really sort of drew me in was this, there's always a nexus, speaking of nexus, of social innovation and activity, and then also doing the work. And one isn't a substitute for the other, but both can amplify a message. And so that was sort of home life in the philanthropy space.
And you are now a mother yourself.
I am. I have a 7-month-old son, and my hope.
Will he be picking up trash soon?
I cannot wait for him to pay. I'm from the South, where you are doing yard work, and your house should be wherever your home is.
We do yard work in Maine as well.
And it's, well, I can tell you, in New York, that's not necessarily a thing.
Fair.
But it will be a thing in my household. I can't wait. I want to clean. I mean, honestly, I cannot wait for this child to, and I hope he has passion for it. That's my biggest concern, because for me, it really changed my ability to feel that I could have agency over my boys and things that I cared about. And so I want him to have agency and feel the sense of worth and see the value in others, and feel that keeping things clean and neat, and the garbage wasn't about it being in front of our house. The garbage it's in the community's house. And so we want the community to look and feel the way we feel that it should feel.
Well, the specific problem of trash on the ground aside, I think it's a very important lesson, one that a lot of kids, particularly American kids, don't learn, is that in order for it to be picked up, someone has to do it.
Absolutely.
These things don't just happen.
Right.
There's absolutely nothing that just happens.
Nothing.
It's all because someone did it, and you can be that someone. And particularly if you see something you don't like, you can be the one to solve that. I think there's too many people who see things they don't like and say, or maybe that's for somebody else to solve,
Right.
or worse, there's nothing that can be done about that. We have to
Absolutely.
just accept that. So the baby is 7 months. What is his name?
The baby's name is Harry the Fourth. So he's a joy. I mean, I think every parent, or most, I won't speak for every parent, but I don't think it's uncommon for someone to say, my child is advanced. I will sit here and say, I honestly think this child is...
I'm sure that he is.
Phenomenal. He is a joy, and he is a blessing, and I don't take him for granted. I think it's a privilege to be his mother, and the role of parenthood for me really is not so much to create him or try and shape him into being the person that I want him to be. I really want to shape him to be the best him that he can be, whoever he's meant to be in this world, and teach him those lessons, because if I don't teach him the lessons, the world is a hard, rough place. So I want you to learn how to handle the hard, rough place without becoming hard and rough yourself and hardened by life.
That's a good point. There are other people that will teach him if you don't.
And they will not be as firm and loving as I intend on being. They'll just be firm.
Yes. So what is it that you do other than raising Harry the Fourth, and probably doing some caretaking of Harry the Third, I assume?
I think they're both full-time jobs in and of themselves, if I'm perfectly honest. I honestly, sign me up for cloning. There's so many things we're doing in technology. We have not mastered that yet.
If we're going to clone anyone, I think we should start with Candice.
I'm willing to be the litmus test to see how this is going to go. So outside of what happens in the home, I also am a managing partner at a law firm. We're not a traditional law firm in the sense of, I hate to use just, but I really would put air quotes and say just legal work. Really what we do is at the intersection of business, technology, entertainment, and we recognize the fact that things are not done in silos anymore. And so for people to be able to have strategic plans, we go from soup to nuts in the business strategy, the legal advisory services, and also synergistic relationships that can help them scale what they're doing. And so I find a lot of pride in that work. We do intellectual property, but we also just really do brass tacks amazing legal innovation across the board in terms of the way things are done, using the law that already exists, but finding ways to make it applicable to clients so that they can grow in a beautiful way. Or even if it's not so beautiful, sometimes it's not, look, this is where the sausage is made. Let's just say they can grow in a smart, strategic, empowering way that serves the business and the client very well. And so that keeps me extraordinarily busy. We're very proud of the work that's happened. Our clients have won amazing awards, which isn't in itself a testament to our work, but it is a testament to what scaling smartly can look like, and that society benefits from great business and legal strategy. So that's the day, that's the night, that's the reason, I've got the bags that only you can see, and the rest of the world can just hear about.
There are no bags.
Well,
They're under my eyes.
No.
Do you remember, Candice, how you and I met?
I did, and I think it's one of my favorite stories. We met, it's true, during really what I find to have been a life-changing event for me. We met going to Israel via the Schusterman Foundation.
First met at the Newark Public Airport.
Our flight was out of
Gate 18B. It got delayed for 2 hours.
That's so true.
We got to spend some extra time together at Newark Airport.
Waiting and we had different facilitation groups. So this was a way for us to all sort of get to know each other. We were in the same group, but it was one of those things where everyone was able to commingle in that moment.
We were in the small group together. You, me, and E. Davis.
That's so true.
Oh, that was fun.
We certainly were. It was awesome, and that trip really allowed us to not only have what I think now no one will be able to experience what we were able to do, sitting down with Shimon Peres, and it was a blessing. It was humbling. It was.
So for clarity, we went on a Reality Global 2015,
yes.
which was a all expenses paid trip to Israel for global impact entrepreneurs.
Yes.
The trips have now become like a lot more specific. Like it's for people who work in the food industry or the music industry or sports or
tech.
Or fashion or tech, whatever. Ours was far more nebulous. It was just global impact.
And it was
nonprofit leaders, philanthropists, things like that.
And across the board, private sector as well. And what was so interesting is that
it was just such an impressive group.
Individuals applied, and they selected, I want to say 50, and which speaks to philanthropic work. At the time, we were all connecting. Careers and what people were doing in their personal space did not come up in conversations. It was truly when we were leaving where people were able to get a better understanding of, oh, so wait, this is what you do almost in your real life, because the work was what was setting the tone, and the mission of really understanding Israel and understanding, honestly, true giving, which was exhibited. It can't be exhibited better than the way Lynn Schusterman does it. She really is just a blessing for so many. But I think it was humbling to see with love how bringing people together who truly want to change the world and on a global scale, making the world a better place, making the world kind again.
Tikkun Olam. Do you remember that from the trip?
Yes, exactly. And Ahava. Yeah, it's truly recognizing that, and I think those are the things that stay with you for the rest of your life, and those are the things that you want to share with others, so that people who can't physically be in that space feel it based on your presence in their life.
Was that your first time in Israel?
That was my first time in Israel, and my first time, I have to say this separately, on the Syrian border. We were there before. At the time, the
I'm
news
about to tell a slightly embarrassing story.
Do
you remember? Do you know what I'm about to tell?
I think it may be about a drone or a bird. Yes.
It's actually not about a drone.
Oh. Okay.
The reality trips, usually most of them go to that. It was what was that building? The Russian headquarters during the '67 war, I guess. A very old, abandoned military compound near the Syrian border. It's one that take the geopolitics out of it. It's just a spectacular location, just in terms of the view and the way it looks. It's up in the Galilee region. But we also you could see Syria from there. And notably here, we heard some bombs while we were there, which I'm pretty sure that's the only time I've ever heard active bombs. And then they took us to a mountain nearby. I forget the name of that mountain. We went up to the top, and there was a bird hovering
Depending on who you ask, there was a bird
It was
or
a bird.
or a drone.
I know what a bird looks like. Anyway, I think possibly because I think maybe the bombs had shook you a little bit, but you were convinced that was a drone. And she started screaming, "That's a drone! There's a drone there!" And everyone's like, "No, Candice, that's a bird."
I am from Southwest Atlanta,
people.
And I have to tell you, when you witnessed what I witnessed,
it was very obviously a bird.
I was not waiting around to find out whether or not it was a bird or a drone.
You didn't care so much. You were. If there's a 1% chance that that's a drone, I'm out of here.
We are aborting mission all. We are aborting mission. I'm videotaping, and we're out. That was truly, and it was one of those. It's the juxtaposition of we were in an air quote safe space, but within view, you could see people who were. At the time, the press was categorizing these grand exodus and the refugee crisis as a crisis that was about economics and that was about people looking for new jobs and new opportunity. And I could see with my own two eyes, no one's looking for a job. No one's looking for new opportunity. They are looking to live. A job would be nice. Opportunity would be great. But in the immediate present, I am looking not to have my home and my children massacred. And I was seeing the smoke rising from areas. Damascus was not far at all from where we were cities where individuals were doing, quite frankly, what we're doing right now, and that's over. Or you live in this reality of a combination of my life is in jeopardy, but I have to go on. And that exists in Israel, this balance. And of your life goes on, but there's always this undercurrent. It exists throughout the Middle East. And we were watching it play out, most specifically in Syria, and it was heart-wrenching and painful, and it also changed my viewpoint of what we consume as media consumers, because what we were getting in reporting truly centered on people need to come to America for jobs. No, this was about safety and security, and our role as philanthropists is not only to engage with those communities, but also to make sure that the information that people get who aren't able to be boots on the ground in those areas and see truly what's happening, that we can deliver this message out of respect for what they're going through consistently and fairly, so that not only to bring in assistance and aid where it's possible, but also enlightenment and changing the discourse around what someone's seeking to take from someone, and really more so what we're seeking to give to others.
Are you familiar with MacArthur's 100 and Change program?
I don't believe that I am.
So we are fortunate MacArthur grantees. We are probably we probably got the smallest grant they gave last year.
I do believe that this is something that is worth not only noting, but celebrating. This is huge.
Thank you, MacArthur Foundation.
Thank you, MacArthur Foundation. This is exceptional, Dave. Congratulations.
Yes, I'm very pleased with it.
Well, don't we all love that? How he humbly brought that in. That is phenomenal. Please explain.
So as I mentioned, we got one of their smaller grants from last year.
Wow.
But they did a sort of historic granting program last year called 100 and Change.
Okay.
They were going to give $100 million to a project that would have great impact, a large amount of scale. And there were a lot of, as you imagine, a lot of people applied. And what I kind of like about it is it was a fairly transparent process. So I think the last 10 finalists, their final interview, they recorded it just like this, and you can listen to to them trying to pitch, them making a pitch for the $100 million and all the good work that they would do with it. And I wanted to mention it because the winner was Sesame Street, the international version.
I'm loving
and
this.
they're going to use the money to make a Syrian-specific version of Sesame Street. So Syrian outfits, Syrian characters, Syrian names.
And I know this sounds so cliche. It's not cliche. It runs the risk, but you can, seeing yourself in media, and media that it's if you can see it, you can be it, right?
I can see the sun just went behind a cloud, and now I can see again. It's
really,
very bright here at the U.S. Institute of Peace.
You all can't see it, but we have had, it's been glaring, but I think that
I have been squinting this entire interview, and now I can see you.
It's true. I do feel a great relief at not having to wear shades. I wasn't wearing shades, so my cornea says thank you. But it's so critical for not everyone. It is important for everyone, but I think most specifically for children to be able to have that sense of normalcy. There's a woman
And also learn how to read and count.
learning how to read and count, but just a sense of doing that in a space where something seems similar when everything else is no longer similar. You're divided from cultural references that you know or that your family knows, so they're trying to make a way for you in a space that is not necessarily their comfort zone. And seeing someone who's nice and kind and generous and is doing things that you may not be able to do in your home because language is a barrier. So you're learning to count and you're learning to read and you're learning about community, but your community is phenomenal. So I'm thrilled to hear that. I was a huge fan of Sesame Street.
Oh, it's incredible.
And I mean, long live Maria. I feel like she was she's a personal friend. I mean, don't we all know Maria and Oscar and Big Bird and Snuffleupagus and of course Gordon. Yeah, I mean, yes.
Who was my favorite? Probably Snuffleupagus.
And Gordon, we had two Gordons actually. I'm old enough
I remember
to
there was
that. Holly Robinson Pete's dad played Gordon on Sesame Street.
Yeah.
And on Philanthropy and motherhood, sort of the synergy of that. I have to say, I watched her documentary, her television show. She has a show. Throughout my pregnancy, I had what I can only describe as wicked insomnia towards the end. And what she's done with the Holly Rod Foundation as a combination of autism awareness and also Parkinson's disease, which runs in her family, and really shedding light on the science behind it. On the Parkinson's side, a health awareness in terms of genetically, if this is something that you may be statistically more inclined to get, what that looks like for your family. Her brother, she found out on the show, now also has Parkinson's, so imagining that from his mother's perspective. And then also what she's done in terms of how we are raising children with special needs in a society and advocating for them was incredibly powerful. And I kept looking because the show, from both a philanthropist side and as a human being side, was about releasing your expectations and accepting things and meeting them where they are, and then how can you best guide and direct it. So with her daughter, she sent her off to college, and you get this whole top school application, and your daughter is a rock star. Your daughter has a twin who has special needs, and he's watching as all of this is happening in college and being this rock star in that same way. That wasn't in the cards for him. But what can we do where he can be the rock star and he can have the sense of agency over himself, to not feel that his choice is less than his sister's choice? And it was really just, they were so open and honest. And where she gets the energy, because she doesn't just have those two children. I want to say she has 5 kids, and I just kept thinking, like, is this human? She can't be human. But
I have 0 kids, and I can barely handle it.
It's amazing. And so,
I only imagine when you
taking that back to Gordon's daughter.
So
is
just
a
to be
rock
clear,
star.
original Gordon is Holly Robinson Pete's father?
I want to say the original Gordon, yes. And if it's the inverse, then I want to say that her father was the longest running Gordon. So with I want to say he had the bald head. And,
The longest running Gordon.
Yeah, he's the one I remember as a kid from the late, the end of the 70s, not, the middle, though that's cool too.
That is not possible.
And
That doesn't
growing up
mathematically
in
make sense,
the 80s,
Candice.
I wish.
Because you are clearly 25 years old, and so there's no way that...
At heart, I am. At heart, I am.
One of the that was my trip we went to Israel on. That was my first trip to Israel. And I never went on Birthright, mostly because I didn't want to. So I grew up as a Jew in Maine, where we don't have a whole lot of Jewish community.
Right.
I am Jewish. I'm just as Jewish as everybody else. But when you're not I didn't go to temple a lot. I don't necessarily know all of the rituals or prayers. I can't even name all of some of the holidays. I'm like, I've never heard of that one. Like I said, I'm just as Jewish as everybody else.
And we sat through a talk where that was emphasized.
Yes.
Yes.
I wasn't so sure that I was as Jewish as everybody else before the trip, and I now know that. But I also, as a result, Jews that have a lot of Jewish community, like people who went to Jewish day school and Jewish summer camp and do know all of their prayers and everything, I would often feel uncomfortable, right? So the idea of going on a birthright trip with just all sorts of Jews who knew more about it than I did, right? didn't seem like a whole lot of fun. So what I really like about what Schusterman does is that there were Jews on the trip, none particularly devout.
Yeah. There were Christians on the trip. I was
Christians,
there.
2 Muslims.
Yes.
And you are not Jewish. Do I assume correctly?
Yes.
I think though that you love the neighbor and you care about repairing the world. So
that's 100% true. And I always
So-
say I think the religions are cousins, right? It's like sitting at a big familial table. The religions are cousins, and just like any family, there's
Mishpoka.
yes, exactly, and which is the heading. It's family. That's family. For our listeners who may not
It
be
is
aware.
if you don't speak Yiddish. I think a large portion of our listeners do speak Yiddish. You'd be surprised.
I love it. Well, then I don't need to translate for the listeners.
Yiddish was my grandfather's first language. You may remember we had that when we briefly talked about when we were at the kibbutz.
Yeah.
They talked about the decision that Israel made originally to speak Hebrew, to bring back Hebrew.
Yeah.
It had been basically a dead language, and they brought it back, and now it's the main language in Israel, which is they did it in one generation, which is very impressive. But most Jews were speaking Yiddish at the time, and including my grandfather, who actually resented that decision because they were sort of taking his language away from him. So he made sure to teach me all the Yiddish swears, which is basically everything in Yiddish. It's pretty much a swear-based language. Anyway, I'm curious to know why you are not Jewish. Israel is not your homeland. I don't. Maybe you think that. I don't know. What made you want to go on that trip from some Jewish foundation?
I had heard amazing things about the Schusterman Foundation, so that speaks to your reputation precedes you. I had heard just phenomenal things, and I'd also heard phenomenal things about the trip. And what's interesting, what people don't know, is Israel had been on one of my bucket list of places I wouldn't go.
Wouldn't go?
No, wanted to go
okay.
to, yeah. And so when I found out about it, I kept thinking, oh my gosh, my bucket list. And I didn't know it was going to be all expense paid. I just knew there's an application process, you go. I didn't know what the residual effects of that were. If they were going to say, okay, for you to attend, you need to pay X, Y, Z. All I knew was my bucket list. This is a sign. I'm supposed to be applying to this. And I didn't know, what the application process would be, how it would turn out. But I'd heard amazing things. And we've spoken to the fact that I'm a Christian. Christians should be seeing Israel. I want to see where Jesus walked. I would like to also.
And we did.
We saw where he was buried. We saw where he walked.
We saw where he met the Good Samaritan.
Yes, we saw exactly. And so, from a religious standpoint, there are and that's why the dialogue and the discourse is so critically important, because there's such a beautiful shared history, and I wanted to see this beautiful shared history. And it was more than what I ever could have imagined. I went in expecting it to be awesome, and it was phenomenally awesome. And it was eye-opening, and it was valuable. And I truly believe that while I was able to obtain a lot of historical context and knowledge, I don't think there is enough reading I could do to become an expert on the scenarios that the Middle East is faced with now. I wouldn't even begin to.
There are experts
touch
in
it.
this building here at the U.S. Institute of Peace who still have a lot to learn about that.
And I think it's so immense and so humbling. And what that really showed me was that really what I was there to do was listen and learn and teach Ahava in my way coming back and sharing the message that was the undercurrent and the undertone of everything that I experienced. I mean, and keeping in mind, we sat down with children who were also from Palestine and from Israel and who were seeing and
I remember that kid.
They
Adam.
were discussing the world that they see, and that's the world I believe they deserve to see. And I don't think it will be I don't know when they will see it, but I had so much hope and so much faith in the future that it was moving and important, and I felt that was a trip that I needed to take, because otherwise I didn't even realize how the media was shaping and misshaping conversations and going there I was able to hear facts, unfiltered, and I know it's very difficult for people to believe that when they hear Lynn Schusterman sent you to Israel. Certainly, she provided a filtered context, and no more than the lens of your eyes shades colors, right? So it was for me to see, it was for me to learn. I was given a list of books I could read. People were very honest in their conversation. The children spoke their truth. And it was meaningful in that life exists in the gray, right? And the goal is to find peace in the gray in the midst of all of that, and what that really looks like for people who are living it. And also hearing, I mean, the most humbling part for me was we were walking through a museum, and we had this small, petite woman who was going through, and she was showing everything. And
Is this Yad Vashem or the art museum?
Yad Vashem. And
That lady was great.
Later on, come to find out that her husband and child.
Yeah, she's a famous. I forget the.
Yeah,
She was a really big deal. The surgeon.
No,
Was that her
husband and daughter at the wedding, the entire family had come into town, and they had a ritual of going to go get coffee every morning on a certain day. It was the day her daughter was set to get married. So the father and the daughter went to the coffee shop, and on that day a bomb exploded. And the what would have been a wedding was a funeral. And she's walking through, and people who knew who she was, but no one wanted to have that exchange, because this is sort of her safe space in terms of showing the museum. But it puts into context that in the midst of everything, life is still happening, and her life was changed in. I mean, no one should be sacrificing their family.
No, certainly not.
And
we are at 30 minutes. I have a couple more questions.
Okay, yes. So that was a humbling moment.
The
reality of how this
the entire trip was humbling.
looks in real life.
And I'll say I'm remembering, and you may remember we heard from a survivor in the morning before we went into Yad Vashem. His name was Asher.
Oh, yes.
Which is Hebrew for survivor. I had heard from survivors a lot. I was involved with Rachel fundraising for survivors in America that live beneath the poverty line, and I am a lot of my people I'm related to survived that as well. Many did not. According to my uncle, Hitler killed 35 of us. But every time I had seen so it was kind of like it wasn't really. I mean, Asher was very impressive. But that was not the first time I'd heard a survivor talk, right? And so I knew most of what he was talking about. He had some fairly interesting. He had a rough go of it. It was generally harder for the boys. I mean, he was working when he was working in the 6 or 7 in a working camp. And I remember, and I'm pretty sure it was you. Something I'd never really heard anyone say. I may choke up a little bit. Was that your takeaway was, that if Hitler had been successful, that means that you wouldn't have gotten to meet all the Jews on the trip?
Yeah.
Including me.
It's true.
And I don't know, I had never heard that sentiment before. It had a lot of, made me feel very good. And I am glad as well that at least some of us made it through that.
Yeah.
I am, like I said, been involved in Jewish causes and the Jewish fundraising world for a long time. That's how I was able to network my way into the Schusterman trip. I do not think I applied. That does not sound like...
We are not all big time like you. We have to go through, and
it doesn't
that's
sound
a
like
great
something
segue into sort of the work that I do. Yes, we've got to apply our way in. No, philanthropy for me, and I want you to finish because
what's that? The Jewish Foundation world and how Jewish funding works makes a lot of sense to me because I've done it for a while. It's a fairly organized community. I have worked on non-Jewish causes. I worked in D.C. One of my early jobs was at the Seed Foundation here in town, which we have a school in Anacostia, and I believe every single student in the history of that school has been African American.
Yeah.
I mean, there are white folks who live in Anacostia, but they're not going to they're probably going to some private school somewhere
True
else.
story. My mom lived in Anacostia with my grandmother. She went to boarding school, but
Yeah.
right. It's a completely different community now, and I feel like it's probably had 6 or 7 lives since then. My grandmother now lives with us,
Parts are quite nice.
but it's
Has a bad reputation. But
it's quite an interesting dynamic in
So we
terms
worked
of
with-
economic.
We worked with some African American philanthropists back then. Particularly, there's a Sheila Jackson is one of the
Yeah.
bigger ones here in town
Yeah.
from BET.
Yes.
And it seemed to me that it was just mostly individual donors. So I don't think I can name an African American foundation except possibly the Holly Robinson Peete Foundation, which I just learned about.
And
But I know that you know more about that world than I do. So
Yes.
how does African American philanthropy work?
well, I always caution about speaking for a whole, but I can say.
Well, I assume you
my
represent all black folks. Is that incorrect? You're not the ambassador.
There are moments when I wish I did, but no, I do not.
Your people could
I
do worse.
do not.
If we're gonna appoint one, it should be you.
But I will say the first billionaire, black billionaire, honestly, his daughter's name is Christina Lewis, and the Lewis Foundation is actually in Baltimore. And he was an attorney, graduated from Harvard. There are buildings at Harvard named after him. And he essentially was working Wall Street, doing mergers and acquisitions. His book, which still is a great read, regardless of race, is called Why Should White Boys Have All the Fun? And it's all about him going in and breaking down doors and barriers as this Wall Street attorney who was doing amazing things. And now he has 2 daughters. His daughters are now doing that and his wife is a powerhouse. So his widow has continued to do amazing work on his behalf. I want to say, and I could be misspeaking, I can't remember how he passed. I'm inclined to say, I don't want to misspeak, but however he passed, it was sudden. And so his wife is a super powerhouse who supports, they have a home in East Hampton and a home in New York, in the city, and they support a vast array, not only their foundation, but a lot of individual art, philanthropic organizations as well, and education organizations. And her daughter has now created a coding tech foundation and organization herself, which she uses to educate boys of color in the tech field. And so, but they are, preeminent philanthropists. And then the way I want to say our community works, or what I've witnessed in my very short 39 years on this earth, there's so much culturally and historically that has been underserved within the black community, and not by our own doing, right? And so because of that, when things need to be a collaboration, they will be. For instance, the museum, and sort of making sure that before anyone's going to take us seriously, let's do a groundswell and get money together now so that we're able to do it.
Have you been, by the way? She's talking about the new African American History Museum here in D.C.
Yes, we are. So
It's incredible.
I'm going in April. I have 2 tickets. I wanted to go this trip.
It's still hard to get into.
We also wanted to put a group together, and unfortunately, and what's my parents went as part of sort of the opening, but no, I have not gone, and I wasn't on a waiting list, but when they opened up the tickets, April was the first date I could get, and I think I tried to get it as soon as I knew I was coming here, and so I cannot wait to go. I think it's a narrative that needs to be shared. The brutality, and it's interesting because what I think differs from the black community and the Jewish community is media has been very strong in terms of film and narration, so that you should see, if you have not seen a film that focuses on or addresses some form of the Holocaust, I don't know where you've been. Like, I feel like, I don't know. And
it's the most documented event in human history, they say.
And with black history specifically,
there might be fewer films about slavery.
It's a delicate balance, because what we did not want to have happen is that the conversation surrounding black people is the parameters are constantly slavery. But then what gets lost is truly the brutality. We're able to romanticize exactly what happened, and we don't go through children actually being taken from their mothers, what it looks like when people are chattel. We romanticize, the Sally Hemings relationship without actually saying she was the half-sister who was 13 years old of Thomas Jefferson's wife, and at 13, despite the fact she was owned by him, there's no consent. It's a story of rape. It's not a story of a love story, and so there's this delicate balance of historical context and really illustrating the brutality of it wasn't beautiful dresses and house slaves, it's whippings, beatings, rape, losing your children, having children with your rapist, having those children sold, being amputated for trying to run away. But then if that narrative is pushed too much to the forefront, true facts surrounding the rise despite all of that gets lost. If you use a golf tee created by a black man or a black person, refrigerator, the stoplight, all of those.
The golf tee invented by an African American?
Yes, and the broom. I mean, there are things like
the
that.
Broom?
The broom. And what people miss is a lot of the
That's a good one.
And the ownership, potato chips. I mean, it's...
And the peanuts, right? They told me about the peanut in school.
It's one of those... Or how it's processed, right? And what people miss is, well, how in the world, why don't they own the patents? Well, you can if you don't have freedom, right? So one, your owner gets the residual, which is where sort of those reparation conversations come in. And two, invention is the product of necessity. So if you're the person who's doing the work, who's going to be creating these products to make that work make more sense? And so, there's this balance of how those stories are told and actually who is telling those stories. And so what you find is that within the Black community, there is a sense of wanting history to be acknowledged honestly and truthfully, and being in a position to actually share that story, which is a completely different thing, but unfortunately we haven't had that seat at the table, so that's been missing. And then running the risk of telling one story too much. I could understand when people said, which is contrary to what we just said about Holocaust films, when people were like, I do not need to see 12 Years a Slave every single year. There is another narrative that can be told. But with that being said, there are people who miss that. I assume everyone knows about freedom riders. That's an assumption that's not based in truth.
Not everyone does.
Or acknowledge the work and the death that happened with children who are fighting for their right to be seen. Not seen in a visual sense, seen as humans. We're still fighting for that. And so there's this duality, and it's not just two things. There's this spectrum of what we need to do to properly address needs in our community, but also recognizing that we have our community, but we are also members of other communities. So it tends to be
yes, absolutely,
a shared across-the-board spectrum, making sure to pay attention to schools, particularly schools that are underserved, where for no fault of their own, systemic oppression has set them up, quite frankly, 12 years behind everyone else via lack of resources, lack of tax dollars being allocated to these students, lack of private donors who say we see something in these kids. If you don't see the children as children to begin with, you're not seeing the possibility in them either. And so trying to feed those gaps is a concentrated effort, but then also saying, but we care about museums as well. We care about the Met. We are members of a greater society, and so we have to, show up there too. So sadly, we haven't been able to concentrate holistically on just our community, but we work very hard to have a balance of engagement in the greater society while also saying this is something that we're seeing, and also we have not had the luxury of having the public-facing news embrace things that have been devastating in historically Black communities, serviced in the same way. We are now talking about a national opioid crisis. When this was the Black community, we decided we were going to have a war on drugs. We completely broke up families. We have taken children out of their homes because they were selling drugs specifically being marijuana. We have now legalized marijuana and have not found a way to share in the wealth of children who are doing it. And I'm not saying that children should have been selling drugs, but I do think that we as a nation have very short memories when it comes to how we treat one class of individuals and how we treat others, and that there are repercussions for that, and those repercussions aren't pretty. And so philanthropists of color find themselves having to come in and say social justice is something we don't have the luxury of saying. It's something we do for fun. I don't want my 7-month-old to be shot. And the reality of that is
I also
that
do not want little Hank to be shot.
And the truth is, he lives in a very good neighborhood. And where is the most dangerous place for a black male to live? In a very good neighborhood, because the assumption is he shouldn't live there.
Yes.
And so those aren't things that I can say. Sadly, I would rather put my money in things that are a little bit more light and fun. My work is hard enough. I want to enjoy my philanthropic engagement. But I don't have the luxury of picking and choosing at this point in history. I hope, my grandchildren will. My grandparents are able to see a lot more than what they were able. I had one grandmother who was, very blessed and fortunate. My paternal grandmother was a domestic. And so all of her children went to college. All of her grandchildren, essentially went to Ivy League schools and graduate schools and did exceptionally well against all odds while she was cleaning for a Klansman. The build takes a lot. Education was their primary focus, and ownership, right? Owning land and all of that. And so, my mom had a different upbringing, but the reality of that is very humbling, and also shows that it is there before the grace of God go I. I don't think black people traditionally can say it's the luck of the draw, but even within very fortunate families, it's luck. I had the right parents. I had parents who, were very loving and engaging. And if we called my dad right now, regardless of what he's doing, he will pretend like he wasn't doing anything and was waiting for this call. My mom will not pretend she was not doing anything. We will get to the point, but then she lovingly and engagingly will take the time. She has mentees still, and she has, a child and a grandchild. I thought I'd keep her busy enough, but she thinks it's important to go and tutor young children and bring them to the Capitol and do all of these things. And she does it because she truly believes she's responsible for every child. When she sees any child, regardless of color, that could be her kid. And so that child deserves a chance, and it shouldn't be about luck. And the black community is, it's to our detriment. We are very forgiving. There's a quote, if any other group had what's been done to it consistently, and they know that, the world knows this. If someone had done what's been done to black people to them, it'd be full-on war constantly, and yet it's not. And so it's a reckoning of saying there's some things we have to heal ourselves, not because we don't want allies and assistance, but because we recognize we're still fighting to be seen as humans and to not have our narratives dehumanized.
I think I was reading something yesterday, and I think it was Coates who said that racism is broad sympathy for some, and broad skepticism for others.
100%.
And that, there's definitely, I've met some of them, just like open, bigot racists that are like comfortable with their racism, but most think they're not racist. It's just they apply. It's like I think the opioid versus crack epidemic is the perfect example there. When it was crack, they're drug addicts, it's their fault. We should put them in jail. When it's opioid, it's a scourge affecting our children, and we need compassion and care. And it shouldn't be too hard to convince everybody to be sympathetic for everyone. I wouldn't think. Thank you very much for sitting with us. This was a fascinating conversation. I'm sure everyone learned a lot. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day here at Nexus.
I do, and I look forward to bringing more African American philanthropists and
yes,
change makers to the table. I want you to know we are out there, and I say we. I am probably the meekest of them all, and there are.
I'm sure that's not true.
There are phenomenal people doing great work.
So at the end of most interviews, I usually ask my guests if they would be willing to review a few unfunded proposals last round.
Of course I will.
So we will, sometime in February, I will send you a few. Would you like, is there any particular, you want any particular sort of area that you would like to read?
I'm very passionate about education.
Okay.
And so I
We
would
always
love
get
to read
some education proposals.
education, and I love arts programs. And
Terrific.
so I would love to see education and arts programs.
All right, if you're out there and you have a good education or arts proposal, you should send it in, and maybe Candice will read it. And maybe she'll introduce you to Holly Robinson Peete or something like that.
I mean, we'd love it. Let's do it.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.